Good morning, and it's Wednesday, and welcome back to Blast and a Half. I wanted to ask you, have you ever been either at a dinner party or someplace, maybe even at a business meeting, and somebody's chewing with their mouth open, or they're getting really close to you? You know, Jerry Seinfeld says, he's a close talker. Well, this is one of the reasons why I brought on our guest today, and I am so excited. This is Crystal Bailey, Crystal L. Bailey, and Crystal is what I like to refer to as the Queen of Etiquette and Netiquette. And what that means is that Crystal, while she was in law school, was kind of feeling some of that, maybe what we all go through, which is some of that imposter syndrome, and really started getting curious about what it would mean to be in those environments and have the right etiquette. Now, before we get into Crystal, I just want to clarify, etiquette, especially in her world, isn't some highfalutin thing that only applies to royalty. So you do not need an appointment with the Queen or any of that. Etiquette, as Crystal has so beautifully executed, is a way for all of us, regardless of where we are in our career, to really show up so that we are inclusive of manners, respect, a level of decorum that says, yes, we are professionals, and also abiding by some common and maybe lesser known ways of behavior. So Crystal, thank you. Also, one last thing, Crystal is the director. I mean, this is amazing. Crystal is the director of the Etiquette Institute in Washington, so I'm sure she's seen her fair share of lack of etiquette, and also works with folks at the junior level and all the way through. So thank you for coming today. And I love that you had a backstory. You mentioned that you were homeschooled in etiquette, and help us also understand, like, why, when you were growing up, right, why this started to plant the seed, and then the gap of what you found when you realized people in the marketplace are, I mean, if you want to go to Ritz-Carlton and get an etiquette certification or be trained there, it's beaucoup bucks, right? You said about 10 grand.
Yeah. So for me, short story. My mom, she was in Amway, and she would go to all of these Amway meetings when I was growing up, and I would be kind of left in a living room of her superior in Amway, on the pyramid, I guess. And she had an etiquette book. It was a Miss Manners book with all of these letters that were written to Miss Manners. And I would just go through and read this book whenever I was over this woman's house. And I think that was kind of my first spark, to the point that my mom, put me in etiquette classes at the local department store, which is something I also very much loved. But I didn't think about it too much more until I was in law school. I was at an etiquette dinner, and this stuff really did apply to my life at that time, right? I was invited to banquets and galas and networking events, and a lot of times you're like, how do I navigate these situations? This is the most awkward thing in the world. I have food, I have a glass of wine. I could have 10 glasses of wine, should I, at this open bar? And I was like, wow, this stuff really applies to what I have going on in my life. I would love to take more classes, maybe even start, my own etiquette business. So I quit law school, and no, I didn't quit. I felt like I should have, though. And I said, I'll finish up, and when I get back to DC, I would get started. And so that's, as of yesterday, it's been 10 years for me.
10 years.
Yeah,
10
I'm
years.
very excited.
So clearly an expert on this topic. And the question from here is, why does it matter? Why does this even exist? And what are the standards of today's etiquette and netiquette, because clearly before the pandemic, the netiquette piece was probably a nice to have, but now, whew, it's a serious issue. Share more.
Truly, truly is. So think about the workplace, right? How many different generations we have in the workplace. With our youngest, I guess, being Generation Z, that's stepped into the space. They have different expectations than Gen X would have, and it's kind of being able to navigate some of these social situations where someone might interact with you differently by email or by phone, have different preferences and ways of communicating. So it's a lot to juggle in the professional space. Add to that how much time we spend in our professional spaces, right? 40 hours, maybe plus a week with people, right? And you can't really control how they behave. Maybe you can put a sign on the office refrigerator telling people to not steal things and uh, and clean out the refrigerator and wash off dishes. But you can only hope for the best. And so uh, I can only imagine if someone is, aggravating me in the workspace, in the kitchen, office kitchen, right? That they're going to then aggravate me in the boardroom. So you want to make sure that you are navigating those spaces with a bit of respect, thoughtfulness, and just kind of the golden rule of treating others the way you want to be treated.
I love that you just drew such a practical but somewhat disparate concept. Somebody who, and we've all been there, right? We used to have signs in my office place with people who didn't put their dishes in the dishwasher, right? And there would be
Yes.
like this person that would go crazy because somebody would leave their oatmeal in there all day, and it would just be horrible. But the translation that you just identified, the person that's leaving all this crap over here and not being mindful to the rest of the office space or colleagues is likelier to not be necessarily somebody that you want to put in front of a client. And so people make those assumptions, they apply those judgments. And so it's very easy when those things, as we talked about pre-show, have a cumulative effect. Yeah, sure, every now and again, no big deal. But for them to happen repeatedly. And so how does this translate? What is something that could draw a similar unrelated disconnect, right, online that could translate for somebody who's interviewing or even just having a coffee?
Yeah. I think, well, there are a lot of things online that we want to concern ourselves with. The way that we're communicating with people is very, very important. Making it clear what format we're going to communicate with someone. For example, to me, I've noticed this a lot lately, that people don't respond in kind. So the way that you've reached out to them, they use a different format of reaching out. For example, if I, give you a phone call, it really should be returned with a phone call as opposed to
Mm.
email or a text message. Maybe that is
Oh,
easier for you, right? However, I've already started our communication in one way, and so that should be respected.
oh, so you mirror. This is really great and important. I love that. So if you are working with a recruiter and the recruiter places a phone call to you, do not reply in text,
Yes.
right? Make
Text
sure
or even email, really, unless they've asked you to respond by email. It's the same way with your aunt, right? She's called you because she wants to hear your voice. So responding with a text message would not be appropriate.
Oh, I love that too, because I think it is easy to default to that. And what it's saying is I'm gonna override the way that you have reached out to me. And yes, in some cases, I know with my clients, if they can't get in touch with somebody by email, I will say, you know what, it's okay. You can do this. But by and large, you want to be respectful and mindful of the initiated communication. What anything else that would be easily overlooked by people who are spending, as we all are, a lot of time online, especially as they are networking or interviewing?
Yes. Being careful about being too informal. So I always say
Mm.
to start off kind of in your most formal way of reaching out to someone, greeting people, even in an email, just as I would greet you in person, right? I would say good morning to you. And maybe throughout the day, it's a wave or a head nod, right? And we can do that in emails too. But I want to start off with that greeting. And then maybe the next email is fine for me to say Lauren, comma, and I can become a little more relaxed. But always thinking about going with the most professional, not shortening people's names, paying attention to those smaller details. I don't know if you ever have someone misspelling your name in an email and you're like, it's right there. um, Paying attention to the small details is really important. I know that we're flying fast a lot of times with responding to people or responding on the go, but I would rather someone just take a moment or two and provide something that is more polished and professional, especially when you're representing a company or organization.
Absolutely. So I agree 100%. I think that even when we don't know somebody, and especially online, there is a little bit less of a barrier, not necessarily. Technology clearly provides a barrier. However, we're still sitting in our homes.
Yes.
So we could be in our pajamas. I'm not, but we could be in our pajamas and nobody knows. And so that gives us that feeling of, oh, it's okay to just say, hey, yo, Crystal, which I would never do. But the point is that I do think that sometimes it can be less professional. And I also want to clarify, professional doesn't mean stuffy. I think that people get confused. What's your definition, and how does this work in the spectrum of what's professional, what's etiquette, and what you described too is what's protocol, and what's just like manners? Because while I think that there's a lot of overlap, I think that it's important to start to think about etiquette as something that is embedded in just the way that you interact with people, especially when it relates to opportunities, when it relates to this is I'm going to be paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. What can I do to make sure that I'm not compromising?
Yes. As you mentioned, it really is a spectrum of terms that we can use. And so at one end, at the lowest or easiest end, I think it's that good old home training that we might get. And if we did have a grandmother that imparted some of these things, or mom or dad that imparted some of these things, it's kind of the things that we learn. Hopefully some of them are innate in how we treat others, and the golden rule as well. And then going from there, there are rules of etiquette, of course, for certain situations and scenarios that evolves and changes. And for example, the handshake, right? Uh, at the beginning of the pandemic, a few etiquette professionals, we got together and we're like, oh my goodness, is the handshake going to go away? What is going to happen with this thing that that we, one, spent a lot of time teaching how to have a great handshake, but also it really is how we feel people out. And before the pandemic, you would have never turned down someone's handshake. That would have been the ultimate insult. But then for the last 2 years, we've been trying to figure it out, and we're elbow bumping and, kicking people and all sorts of ways of greeting someone now. So etiquette evolves and changes with the times, with technology. And then we can move on to thinking about protocol, which those are going to be rules a lot of times that are codified by a government, a university, for example. If you think about when they have special guests that come to a university or graduation, there are rules of protocol and protocol officers in the military as well that handle those situations. And then at the high end of etiquette, I think of laws. And there are some things that are actual laws that kind of can be rules of etiquette. And some things have not risen to that level, but I think they should be. So, for example, a man spreading on a metro train, right? In some countries, that is actually against the law. You could probably be ticketed for something like that. But otherwise, I think it should just be a rule of etiquette, right? That you are allowing other people to have a seat and have space.
Totally, totally.
Yeah,
So
so there's definitely a spectrum.
I'm just going to share some of these comments. Thank you, Erica. Great topic. So if you pay any attention to modern etiquette practices, but it's a great way to build rapport, boost perceived value 100%, and make sure your colleagues feel respected and appreciated. So for sure. Also, a comment from Nina. Good morning from Europe. Looking forward to this session. So I know from some of the past experiences that I've had is, oh my goodness, when you are interviewing or meeting people who come from a different cultural background, good to get clear on some of their etiquette guidelines because it's not the same. And so really, really important. And here's another one from Nina. Appreciate and respect the person you talk to, even though it's only virtual. Our manners in education should already have prepared us for this a long time ago. However, it seems as if the last 3 years have made most of us a bit slack, lazy, and maybe even cowardish at times. I totally agree with this. 100%. Yes. Thank you, Nina. So moving on a little bit, I want to find out from you, aside from the typical thank you note, what are some of the things that folks who are interviewing, networking, in their search do to keep them in good graces? So I know that you mentioned one, which is to mirror the initiated communication, right? You talk to text, I talk to text. But what else can we do to build that cumulative positive effect and avoid some of the perceived negative pieces?
Sure. Well, of course, you know the importance of networking when we have met someone, maybe at a networking event or been introduced. The follow up is so important. And it's important to do it quickly while you're still feeling warm and fuzzy about the interaction and the situation. And then also just the simple fact that if someone waits, 2 or 3 days to get back to you by email, that creates a rhythm. And things stretch out for weeks and months simply by kind of waiting 3 days as opposed to responding within 24 hours. So if I've met someone, I first need to think about how I want to exchange information. And if it's in person, I used to say, business card, and you would typically exchange. And that was another thing that I wondered during the pandemic, would we completely get rid of, right? That's something that I've touched and I'm handing it over to you. And how will we feel about that? But, I've noticed in a lot of industries that are more traditional, so thinking about maybe real estate or academia, politics, business cards are still very much a thing. However, in tech, not really a thing at all. So the best rule of etiquette would be to ask someone, what's the best way for me to reach you? Or how can we keep in touch? And if they say, well, here's my card, then I will exchange a business card. If they say, oh, I'm on LinkedIn, then I'll just pull up my QR code and exchange that way. Or email is great. I'm really responsive with email. So then I would just, even at a networking event, it's perfectly fine to bring out my phone. I'll usually put a little draft just so that I have that email and I know that within 24 hours, I'm going to get back to that person. And maybe we talked about restaurants in the area or an article that I was reading. And so I want to maybe provide a little value during that exchange. And you can do that after your interviews as well, right? Taking something from that interview and not just kind of the stock. Thank you so much for your time.
Totally. Yes, for sure. And so I'm curious if we're on the same page as this. So let's just say you're waiting, because a lot of people are waiting for somebody to get back with a decision, whether it's a next step or an offer. What is your best guideline for how long they should wait?
Yeah. One, of course, the recommendation is getting an idea of what the timeline will be like during your interview process so that it's just not completely up in the air. And at least you have an idea of, whoa, it's been 2 weeks and they said 1 week, maybe I should reach back. I would say it is important to reach back. Reach out to people if you haven't heard anything. Your time is very important, just as much as that other person's. And it says something kind of about your interest and initiative. that you are actually following up, right? And you haven't heard anything. And there's so many things that could be happening on the back end with why people haven't responded or let you know a yes or a no. But I think it says something about you reaching out. Now, I wouldn't reach out 100 times or pester someone once they've said, oh, well, we're still working on something or still making decisions. But um, if I have an idea that it's, a week, I'll wait maybe, 10 days and get back and kind of go from there.
Perfect. I use 5 days, 5 business days.
Okay.
So just
I
as
like it.
just anybody listening, that's kind of like enough time. So clearly, if it's over the weekend, don't factor those days in because it's not really a business day. But you want to be able to give them some breathing room because nobody likes to be harassed. But at the same time, make sure that you have your finger on the pulse so that they, and to stay top of mind. I also recommend using video in your thank you notes so that you are top of mind too. I'll talk to you about that afterwards.
Oh, that's awesome.
Karen Blades beat me to the punch. Thank you, Karen. Curious about how to navigate situations when colleagues or associates repeatedly engage in behavior that demonstrates poor etiquette or lack of respect. So, do you tell them? Do you not tell them? You got lipstick on your teeth? Something. I mean, what do you do with this? Thank you, Karen.
That's a great question, Karen. We have to decide if it rises to the point where we want to say something. And a lot of times we can't control people. And we have to just kind of accept that fact. But there are times maybe when we do feel disrespected. I recall starting off in my career, I was working for the government, and kind of the first day I went into this office, there was an older gentleman. He was actually going to retire in a few weeks, and he was like, "Hey, girl," and I was like, I didn't really know what to say or how to respond, but I knew it was very gnawing and nagging at me. And I thought to myself, well, he's going to retire, in 2 weeks. I have to maybe address it. I even donated $10 to his retirement party. Didn't know him from Adam, but I donated. And then the next thing I knew, he was still there. And they were like, oh, he's coming back as a contractor. So I was like, sometimes we do need to nip those things in the bud. And whether you say it by, if you call me girl one more time, it's going to be me and you, and maybe making it lighter if that's your personality, or just, simply saying to someone why that might be offensive to you. And maybe he wouldn't have understood why that would be offensive to me, and making it clear to them and just sharing a little something. People like to learn. But either way, right, it was imperative for me to say something and do something. It did rise to that level.
For sure. As I was sharing with you before this, I did have a recent issue just the way that you described this, Karen. And I'm telling you, it was really uncomfortable. But because I cared so much about this person and because I felt like it could really put a big crinkle in his interactions, I said something in a nice way. It's not a gotcha, right? Like I'm not coming from a place on high, but it is something that, we all have blind spots. So really, really important to be mindful of when and how you provide that kind of feedback. So let's just talk a little bit about where people are going to be able to access some of your amazing offerings. I know that you have, I'm going to put the website right here in the chat, and tell us about the range and the types of things that you provide so people understand like the breakdown, like what kinds of services, what kinds of classes would they find when they come and work with you?
Sure. One very unique class that I've been offering for probably the last 2 to 3 years is something that it's for adults, and it doesn't just focus on business etiquette. It also focuses on that social side. So social graces, savoir vivre, the art of good living, in a sense of how to sit and stand and walk with, grace and ease. But then we also go into executive presence and thinking about our gravitas, our vocal brand, our body language, and how all of those things are really important in the professional space. We cover networking, and then the art of wine and fine dining etiquette, all in this one course. So that kind of helps to show the breadth of topics, right? That there can be some things that are very social, but etiquette can also be applied to our professional selves. And then, our digital first impression, because so often now we're meeting someone virtually, and we need to be able to make that dynamic first impression. And social media has allowed us, we used to say 7 seconds for a first impression. I think now we know how to double tap and scroll on so quickly that we make those snap decisions the moment we see an image or the first, 3 seconds of a video clip.
Yes, we have one of my dear colleagues. Here he is, Kevin D. Turner, in the audience. And Kevin is the genius behind the phrase that I have also used, called, it's personal branding, not personal blanding. And more recently, he added to his repertoire, you have to brand to land. And so all these pieces about your brand, they're going to say something, right?
Yeah.
They're going to speak for you. They are a form of communication. Every interplay and every interaction, every communication that you send. So consider that. Don't just shoot something off, right? And one of the things that I really love about what I learned when I was going through your course offerings is, again, if you are a doctorate candidate, if you are in a position where you are having a dinner with a potentially new organization or company. I know I have a dear client who is going to Mexico to meet with a group of people who are her potential next C-suite colleagues.
Okay.
And so she happens to come from, she's not from the US, so she has some awareness, right? But when she goes to Mexico, it's probably not going to be the same as where she's from originally, and it's probably not going to be the same as the way that it is here in the United States. So what are the codes of ethics? What are the etiquette styles that she needs to be mindful for? Now, you don't have to go to Mexico to start thinking this way, right? Because every organization has its own flavor or brand of etiquette. And so I really, really appreciate that in your course offerings and some of the things that you're doing, it's not just across corporate, but it's for adults, it's for teens. And another really great point that you made before this is, don't be thinking that this is just for girls.
Yeah.
Right? Share more about that.
Sure. A lot of times with the children's courses, parents will reach out and they'll say, oh, or maybe they'll have a son and daughter and they'll say, oh, I'm going to put my daughter in the classes. And I'm like, what about your son? Because when he's, 29 or 30, he'll be reaching out saying, I'm going to meet my in-laws. Which fork do I pick up and how do I navigate this situation? And that's not the time that you want to have to think about that. When it comes down to dining etiquette, for example, I, never want people thinking about which fork to pick up. This should be like dance, that you rehearse, and then you just step on stage and you enjoy and you perform. And then I can focus on conversation or the business at hand. But I'm not worried about kind of the technical aspects. So I think it's important to learn them so that you feel comfortable and confident when you do step into, those professional situations.
Amazing. So don't be thinking that this is, for girls only. And even before they get to be meeting in-laws or outlaws or whatever they are, right? Because there's a lot of other touch points throughout the process where they still need to show up. Do you recommend that they show up with something in their hand?
As my grandmother would say, don't show up with your arms swinging. So you should have something in your hands when you're going to visit someone. For us growing up, I would go with her to visit people. And sometimes she would just have a 2-liter soda that she would bring. But it was the thought behind it, just to bring a little something for your host.
Absolutely. I cannot tell you how many people seem to have forgotten that etiquette baseline. And it really, I don't know if it's, again, just me and my formal upbringing, but it definitely, it doesn't have to be something from Tiffany's. That's not what this is all about. It's a gesture. And when you're coming into somebody's home, or even a lot of times I'll do favors for people. When somebody does me a favor, I like to send a Starbucks gift card or a book or something that really resonates with them, because they've helped me out. And I just think I don't expect anything in return. It's not about that. I just want to acknowledge it. So, and I want to acknowledge you. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for your responsiveness. Thank you for your warmth. Thank you for really making etiquette accessible. Thank you for making it fun. So it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get in trouble if I, don't do this. Making it approachable and making it so that we all can be better versions of ourselves and build that self-awareness, because these social settings speak for us. And I love how you have made this commonplace and affordable so that people can access it. Thank you, Crystal Bailey. Thank you, every person for joining today. And please go check out the Washington Etiquette. Are they also online? Are they online classes as well?
Yes, they're online virtual classes. We have folks from around the world.
Excellent. Wow. How fun is that? So great opportunity for everyone and great accessibility. Thank you. Thank you. Hang around for a couple of minutes, Crystal, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Bye.
Thanks, Lauren.